You ever hear the one about the secret number? A single perfect code that supposedly governs all beauty in the universe. It's an idea that's been whispered about for centuries, that there's a mathematical blueprint hidden in everything from ancient pyramids to famous paintings, even in the spirals of a seashell. But is it real, or is it just one of the greatest illusions in history?
That is the big question, isn't it? Today, we're going to dive deep into a number that has captivated thinkers for ages, a number that many believe is literally the most beautiful in the entire universe.
And here it is, 1.618, also known as phi. This is the golden ratio. It's an irrational number, which means it just goes on forever, never repeating. It's been called the divine proportion. And its story, well, it's part math, part history, and a whole lot of myth.
So to really get the legend, we've got to go back, way back. Because the mystique around this number, it's not new. Its roots go all the way back to the ancient Greeks.
I think the author Mario Livio put it perfectly. Everyone, and I mean everyone, from mathematicians and artists to biologists and mystics, has obsessed over this simple ratio. It really speaks to our deep hope that there's some kind of elegant logic connecting everything around us.
Okay, but before we can even touch those grand claims, we need to understand what the golden ratio actually is, from a math perspective. And don't worry, it's way more elegant than it is complicated.
All right, in simple terms, just picture a line that's been split into two unequal parts. It's in the golden ratio if the ratio of the whole line to the long part is exactly the same as the ratio of the long part to the short part. It's this unique, self-referential thing that makes it so special. And yeah, seeing it visually like this really makes it click, doesn't it? You can see how that proportion just perfectly maintains itself. It's this harmonious division where the relationship between the parts perfectly mirrors their relationship to the whole.
What's really wild is that you can build this perfect proportion with just a straight edge and a compass. You just start with a simple square. You draw a line from the midpoint to a corner. Swing that line down, and boom, you've just created what's called a golden rectangle, a shape whose sides are in that exact ratio.
And get this, the golden ratio has a super famous cousin, the Fibonacci sequence. You know the one where you just add the last two numbers to get the next? Well, if you divide any number in that sequence by the one right before it, like 8 divided by 5 or 13 by 8, the result gets closer and closer and closer to phi. It's another one of those places where this ratio just seems to magically pop up.
Okay, so that's the math. Now let's see how this thing grew from a mathematical curiosity into this grand, sweeping legend. This is where our human love for a good story really kicks in. Claiming phi isn't just a number, but a fundamental blueprint for life itself.
And the list of places it supposedly shows up? I mean, it's a who's who of iconic stuff. People say it's in the Parthenon, the Mona Lisa, the spiral of a nautilus shell, even the way sunflower seeds are packed together. It seems to be everywhere, and you can see why that idea is so appealing. That one simple rule could explain beauty in so many different forms.
Take the Parthenon. For decades, it's been held up as the poster child for the golden ratio in architecture. The claim is that its dimensions fit perfectly inside a golden rectangle, giving it this divinely inspired harmony.
And the story is just as strong in nature. The argument goes that the golden ratio is the most efficient way to pack seeds in a sunflower or arrange leaves on a stem, so everything gets max sunlight. And of course, that famous spiral of the nautilus shell is always held up as the ultimate example.
All right. But this is where things get really interesting. Because when we actually stop and look at the evidence for all these claims, the story of this perfect divine number starts to fall apart. This Stanford mathematician Keith Devlin kind of hits the nail on the head. He points out that if you look hard enough for a pattern, especially if you're a little flexible with your measurements, you're probably going to find something that looks like what you want to see. Our brains are just wired that way.
So let's circle back to the Parthenon. Here's the problem. There are zero historical records from the ancient Greeks or Egyptians that ever mention the golden ratio. Critics argue that the measurements people use to prove it's there are totally selective. They ignore the parts that don't fit and measure from convenient spots just to make the numbers work.
And it's the exact same story with art. You know those diagrams with all the lines drawn over the Mona Lisa? Well, experts point out that where you draw those lines is pretty much arbitrary. If you use a thick enough pencil, you can make almost any ratio appear. There's just no proof Leonardo da Vinci ever used it. And the nautilus shell. I mean, that has to be real, right? It's a gorgeous logarithmic spiral, which just means it keeps its shape as it gets bigger. But, and this is a big but,
Its specific ratio is not the golden ratio. It's close enough to trick the eye, but mathematically it's a different spiral. The legend just doesn't hold up.
So the takeaway here is that we have to separate the genuine mathematical wonder of the golden ratio from the centuries of cultural myth-making that have been piled on top of it.
So let's focus on what we know for a fact is true. The golden ratio is a fascinating number. It is deeply connected to the Fibonacci sequence, it shows up in the geometry of pentagrams, and it's the basis for some really mind-bending stuff like Penrose tilings. And yes, some modern artists like Salvador Dalí absolutely used it on purpose.
So what is it not? It's not some universal law for beauty. The evidence for it in the Parthenon or the Mona Lisa is flimsy at best. It's not the ratio of the Nautilus shell, and all those claims about it defining the perfect human face have been pretty heavily criticized.
So, does all this debunking mean it's useless? No way, not at all. In modern design, people don't treat it like some magic formula. Instead, it's a practical tool. Think of it kind of like the rule of thirds in photography. It's just a helpful guideline for creating compositions that feel balanced and natural to our eyes.
I really love this take from Sarah Berndt. The golden ratio helps designers manage what you're looking at. It's a great way to balance the stuff you want people to focus on with the empty space around it, which creates a layout that's pleasing and easy to digest without totally overwhelming us.
And that really leaves us with one final big question. The golden ratio might not be the divine blueprint for the universe, but our desire to find one, that's a very real, very human thing. It makes you wonder, why are we so wired to look for simple, elegant patterns in such a complicated world, even when they turn out to be more myth than math?